relationships.
Okay, well, speaking of cosmic beings,
Yeah.
there's a kind of teleological flavor to this in my mind. In other words, if A, these moral truths are really out there, they are absolutes, and B, we naturally evolve in that direction. I mean, if we naturally evolve toward moral truth, that suggests to me in a vague way that there's some purpose to the whole exercise. Now, your analogy with things like perception kind of undermines this claim, because there you don't think of teleology in the same way. It's just, organisms are being fitted to the physical world. Obviously, they reflect the properties of the physical world. But I guess maybe that's what I mean. It's clear that organisms are being fitted to the properties of the physical world. But it's not clear that they're being fitted to the properties of the moral world, or that there is a moral world for them to be fitted to the properties of. In other words, it seems to me you're saying that in the process of being fitted to the physical world, they happen to align themselves with some kind of moral world whose existence is controversial to begin with among philosophers.
Indeed, yes.
And if that's the case, that seems to me to imply that there's some point to the whole exercise, which, as you know, is something I'm a prospect I'm more partial to than you are.
Yeah.
But does that make any sense to you?
Yeah, it does. I don't think I would go in that direction, but I mean, it does make some sense. I mean, another way of thinking about it is it's not that organisms can evolve to aspects of the world that aren't strictly physical, like let's say number,
like the math that describes the physical world.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, but morality doesn't describe the physical world in as straightforward a way. You're saying there are what you could call moral principles that describe realities about interaction among social beings in a certain sense.
That would be one way of thinking about it. So, I mean, to be more concrete, I mean, and simple-minded, but just to get the idea across, say in a prisoner's dilemma simulation, like the Axelrod and Hamilton computer tournament that turned out to implement Trivers' tit-for-tat strategy. That was the Trivers' reciprocal altruism strategy in the form of a tit-for-tat algorithm. If you look at the reciprocity algorithms like tit-for-tat that do well, they have something like a crude version of a moral sense.
Oh, yeah.
Don't hurt someone without any good reason. If someone's nice to you, reward them, etc. Be nice yourself, first try. Now, what took place inside a computer was governed by some kind of logic or law that doesn't have anything to do with any stuff. I mean, it doesn't depend on the computer using silicon as opposed to anything else. But it kind of had to come out the way it did. And so there's a sense in which there's a logic to that kind of reciprocity that in some sense is out there if only you meet the initial conditions that would lead you to run into it. Mm-hmm. Whether that's a kind of goal or teleology, or whether it's simply that if you're plunked in one part of the space of possible designs more or less at random, then locally there's one way, there's a particular way to go. Maybe that's the way to... Yeah,
well, I guess maybe what I would say at the minimum is that if you were arguing to begin with that there is a teleology at work, that natural selection was set in motion by some superintelligence to achieve something, and if you're arguing further that it's to achieve something good, then what you're saying is what you'd like such a person would like to hear, right? I mean, what I mean is this could fit into, it may not logically imply a teleology, but it could fit into a teleological scenario. It wouldn't
refute a teleology, yeah.
It would what?
Would not refute a teleology.
Well, and moreover, if you're looking for a teleology that has a redeeming value, another, a kind of an upbeat teleology, this could fit into a scenario like that. The idea that under what may be fairly generic conditions of social interaction, the system naturally converges on, in some sense, a moral truth. Ideas that one good turn deserves another, for example. Although at the same time, I mean, I don't think either of us would say that all human moral intuitions, and certainly not the way people apply them in the everyday life, can be defended in objective terms as truly moral.
Right. There comes a point, I mean, I think all of what you're saying makes sense, although there comes a point where I think we almost run out of our own intuitions in trying to ponder questions. Right. We've got an intellect that can sort of send us headlong in certain directions, sort of past the point where we have any more grounding in intuition to know whether what we're saying makes much sense. I mean, just to give an example of, say, of a moral, deep moral intuition, where it's very hard to know what it would mean to justify it or not. So running into the burning building to save your child, let's say the choice is saving your child versus saving 5 children that aren't yours. Now, it's a very deep imperative to save yours, and is that morally defensible or not? In the one sense, it obviously is, because we're a certain kind of creature that can't help but have certain kind of moral feelings that no one would quibble with. But it's clear how that came out of our evolutionary history. It's clear that it is not the morality of the fish that in the aquarium that eats its young unless you keep it in a separate partition. And it's not even clear that is justifiable on moral grounds. And there are moral philosophers who say that buying your child a bicycle instead of taking the money and donating it to Oxfam is sinful. I mean,
Peter Singer.
Exactly. There are not a lot of adherents to that, and even Singer himself confesses that in his own life he doesn't meet up to that standard. But at that point, your brain kind of hurts trying to think it through. At what point do we reach the point at which we're questioning that with which we're doing the questioning?
I guess the one thing we can certainly say about our moral intuitions as they have evolved is something that you alluded to earlier. Whatever their failings from the point of view of a true utilitarian, like Peter Singer, in fact, who thinks that everyone's happiness deserves equal consideration, as actually I do in theory, although none of us live up to that. Whatever the deficiencies of our moral intuitions in that sense, those intuitions, as they've evolved, have done a remarkably good job of letting people play win-win games, which is something utilitarian is all in favor of. Letting people, exploit kind of non-zero sumness to make 2 people happier than either, the sum total of their happiness being more than it would be if they were off on their own, not interacting, not drawing on these moral senses.
Yeah, and I think that was a very convincing argument in non-zero to explain something that people don't often acknowledge anymore, but they used to, namely that there has been moral progress. I mean, we don't, in most countries, kill people for offenses like theft or even rape or murder. When we do, we don't nail them to a cross or cut them limb for limb or having a horse pull them apart or all the other horrible tortures that the mind of man has devised over the millennia. We don't, in war, rape is not considered a legitimate spoil of war the way it used to be. We don't use infanticide as a method of birth control. So there are these remarkable degree of moral progress that we've enjoyed, even though we're still, a pretty gruesome species. But compared to the way we were, say, 1,000 years ago, I'd rather be living now. And that's a huge fact that many people deny because it seems too Whiggish or too sort of parochial.
Or because they weren't alive 1,000 years ago and haven't been reading their history books.
And it needs an explanation, and I think the non-zero sumness, as you explained it, is a way of making that not some sort of mystical miracle, but grounding it in some law of the universe, whether it's one that sort of sucked us into it in a particular direction, or one that we kind of stumbled upon, and as soon as we got close enough, we were attracted to it, is difficult to say.
And in your view, although this is a product of cultural evolution, of cultural change over the centuries, in your view, we're put on that path by genetic evolution. There's a